Hi, everyone. It's Diane Yetter from the Sales Tax Institute again, here with another episode of our Women to Watch in Sales Tax. And today I am really excited to introduce you to Deborah Bierbaum, who is a Senior Tax Policy Advisor at MultiState. Deborah, welcome.
Thank you, Diane, and I appreciate being invited to join this. It's always been great working with you in the advocacy space.
Thanks, Deborah. So, Deborah, why don't you tell everybody what MultiState does and then your role as a Senior Tax Policy Advisor? What does that entail?
Sure. So MultiState Associates is a full service state and local government relations companies. It's a great variety of experts in different aspects of government affairs, engage with stakeholders like government organizations, help companies launch advocacy campaigns. We track legislation and regulations for companies, influence state tax policy. So as a senior tax policy advisor, I get involved in a number of those areas, but specifically related to tax. So working with Streamline, NCS, the legislative groups, um, reviewing legislation on the tax side, helping companies. I consult with a number of companies on tax advocacy issues, helping them run or address legislation or do research on legislative history for maybe an audit issue.
That's great, and certainly something that is well needed. So really appreciate what multi-state does. So Deborah, you've been involved in the tax community and the state tax community for a long time, doing a lot of different things. Is there something that you've accomplished that you've been most proud of?
You know, I was thinking about that, and there's a few things that come to mind. I mean, you've been so engaged in streamlined sales tax that having and getting provisions in that agreement is accomplishment. I've been engaged in every aspect of the Federal Internet Tax Freedom Act and getting changes for the communications industry. But I think if I had to pick one thing, it's the Mobile Telecom Sourcing Act. It's a federal legislation that was passed. And the industry, I think it was Annabelle Cannon from Bell Atlantic, came to me when I was at New York and said, we have a problem. Sourcing, they had an idea and it was like, well, that sounds good, but we can't do it. And so I went to the other government groups and said, let's work nationally to try to get a solution. And then I went over to AT&T and we finally got the federal bill signed by President Clinton in 2000. And so there's not much federal bills in this area, and to be part of one from every facet was great.
That is a major accomplishment, and thank you for your efforts in leading that. So you've worked in state government, you've worked in industry, you're now in a policy role. Do you have advice for women working in any one of those roles, or somebody that might want to transition to a role like what you're in today?
Yeah, so I think in both my role at New York State, as Deputy Commissioner Tax Policy, very engaged in tax policy. Then I was hired by AT&T in tax policy. So I really come at things from an advocacy. So I would put two things that come to mind if getting involved in advocacy. One is that when you're looking, and it's even helpful in any role, especially in transaction tax, it's so impacted by changes in the products and new offerings coming out by companies. So I think it's really important to always totally understand what it is you're taxing or who you're taxing before you kind of make a decision with the statute. And that was always big in my role. If I was working with an industry, I would go out and, like, it was an oil barge, I would go out and see how the oil was coming into the state. And so we figured out how petroleum taxes would work. So I think really getting into that helps. And the second is, don't think that just because the statute says something, you can't influence it. Get involved in, you're very engaged in Streamline and you testify before Congress, you're an expert in this area. And people, when you speak at the meeting, it's like E.F. Hutton speaking, attend these meetings. You can do it remotely. You don't always have to travel to be there. And it's a great way to make contacts in government that can help you as you do things, but also to make changes. We're constantly trying to change things and streamline and update them. And Multi-State Tax Commission is another example. Places you can get involved without having to leave your desk and meet people and learn new issues and the challenges that everyone's facing and make a difference.
That's great advice, Deborah. And you're right. It is amazing how having, the relationships that you build with the government officials, how they can help you with things outside of what you're doing in the advocacy. And, this business is about the people. And, I think you're a great representative of somebody that has really built those relationships that when you speak, people listen to. So thank you, Deborah, for sharing that with our audience. And I really appreciate everything that you're doing in the field. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.